intermittent fasting. Does it matter if you or if you eat in the morning and do your window then and not eat late? Or does it really matter just as long as you have your window?
It's a great question. Yes?
Just keep talking.
Okay, I'm just going to talk really loud. If you look at research on chronobiology and how it aligns, we become more physiologically insulin resistant as the day goes on. So if you feel better having a meal, later than an hour after waking up, and you maybe have a meal at 9 and maybe at 2, that is going to be better than if you're having, a meal later in the day into the evening that's going to mess up your circadian biology. And so remember I mentioned there are these melatonin clocks in our guts. And so my Oura Ring has been screaming at me since we've been here because I'm an East Coaster. And a lot of it's because I'm 2 hours adjusted from where I normally eat, even though it's local time. And so to answer your question, I think it's fine if that's what works for you. I get that question a lot. I think it's really dependent on you and your lifestyle, but everyone understanding that insulin sensitivity is something that changes throughout the day. So early in the day, you're going to be more insulin sensitive than you are as the day goes on, as it gets darker.
Any more questions?
This is for Dave. Oh boy, you got 2 microphones. On your study where you're doing the CT angiogram and all the labs and stuff, have you ever done any coronary artery calcium testing? Have you ever included that?
Actually, not a lot of people know this, but when you get a CT angiogram, you kind of get a bonus coronary artery calcification score. So what they have to do is they hook you up to where you can take what's known as contrast dye. But before they put the contrast dye in you, you do a first scan, and in that first scan, they pick up any amount of calcification, and that's how they know what dosage to use for the actual CCTA. And so at that point, the contrast dye comes in, and that kind of allows for them to be able to see your lumen, the blood vessels throughout, and then they can actually map the full geography. So anybody getting a CT angiogram, you get a CAC along with it. It's really a great test, in my opinion, particularly now that the radiation dosage is so much lower on a lot of these modern machines.
Can I add part 2 to that?
Sure, go ahead.
Have you ever seen anybody with significant elevation in their calcium score not have any coronary artery disease, blockages?
Well, first of all, this isn't so much my wheelhouse. I don't really look at a lot of these scans often. There are a lot that are shared to me because of the nature of where I'm at and with my research and so forth. But it's what we would call convenience sampling, right? So it's people volunteering things to me. I'm not going to be able to provide as strong of a broader perspective. But as best as I can with all of that caveating, I will say this, generally speaking, if you have a higher CAC, you probably also have a higher total amount of soft plaque as well. That's generally going to be the case. Usually calcification is later stage of the development of plaque. But that said, there's a recent study that I think was from a couple months ago, really fantastic. Look in my Twitter feed, I did like a mega thread on it. And it showed just how prognostically, how predictively powerful CAC was, because in spite of whether or not it's a later stage, it's not like people get, or at least per the study, it's not like there was a massive amount of people who had soft plaque and no calcification. Oftentimes you will get the calcification as kind of part of that, and it shows up to the degree that it can really be very predictive of your likely cardiovascular disease outcomes, much more so than LDL cholesterol. Per this very study. And they were even looking at folks that had an LDL cholesterol of 190 milligrams per deciliter or higher. Anyway, if you can, just do a search in my name and mega thread, and I go on for quite a ways on. It's a really great study.
I'm curious as to if that holds for exercisers who see calcification in the LAD, for example. But my actual question is regarding the insulin sensitivity and circadian rhythm thing. Do you think that would hold for carnivores who just aren't eating carbohydrates, assuming they're not eating seafood, which has trace amounts? Would it matter as much?
I have to be honest with you. I mean, I'm down a rabbit hole right now preparing for another talk, so I'm like knee deep in the chronobiology research far more than I ever wanted to be. And so I think it's more about understanding that physiologically what's going on with the body, you know, as these circadian rhythms are aligned with our chronobiology, that I think that eating at night, based on what I'm reading, and eating within 3 to 4 hours of bedtime can be potentially detrimental. I mean, I was using the example of myself at the end of one, that, you know, being here and being 2 hours off my normal schedule, my aura has been barking at me. It's been adjusting all those scores, and I'm insulin sensitive, and so I ate a big steak last night, and I ate a big steak the night before, and still kind of struggling with, you know, keeping my numbers where they need to be. Obviously, it's unique to each one of us, because each one of us has our own kind of metabolic flexibility factors. But obviously, carnivore is going to be a diet that I have found personally and professionally that people generally do very well on. But again, it's the meal frequency and timing piece as it's getting closer to you know, dark that can be impactful.
This question is for Cynthia. Everyone's asking fasting questions, but is there an ideal window that you should have when it comes to fasting? So like I do about a 16-8, but is there something that we should be like aspiring to? That's my question.
That's a great question. My general feeling is once you've got the training wheels off and you're fasting regularly, much like we don't eat the same foods every day, we don't do the same exercise every day, I do like to see a variation of that fasting window. And so a lot of it depends on where you are in your menstrual cycle. A lot of it depends on your stress and your sleep. When we're more metabolically flexible, I find that people can lean into a little bit of metabolic, you know, that intuitive eating, like, okay, today I need to break my fast earlier. You know, I'm much hungrier. So I think a lot of it depends on, you know, the lifestyle piece as well. But I do like to see variations because our bodies, you know, they get complacent and lazy if we're doing the same thing every time. So maybe varying with, depending on where you are in your menstrual cycle, because from here I can't differentiate. Like I can't see any ages from here with my glasses being off. But like kind of leaning, I know I'm admitting to the fact I need to wear my glasses. But I would say, you know, variation in your fasting window is going to be beneficial.
Hi. For anyone who wants to have input with Dr. Lindsay, you mentioned that there was research that talked about people who have had bariatric surgery and having issues in their gut biome. Can you elaborate? And because as someone who has had it, and I was successful, I lost 100 pounds, and I was really at a great place in my life. Thank you. But then I just really felt a lot of fatigue suddenly in my gut area, and felt like, you know, felt like this pulling, and it was just distress. Like it was a lot of different things going on. And even though I was working out and eating clean, and I really felt a lot of, I started basically gaining the weight back. And no one really could tell me. The bariatric doctors couldn't. The gastroenterologists, they kept ping-ponging back off of each other. And so I actually asked that question, is anyone doing research to see how, you know, how the surgery might affect someone's gut health? Is there anything, because I felt like it's taken so much time for me to heal. I'm not even sure what I did. So if there's any way you could elaborate.
Yeah, I think it's so complicated. You know, one thing, what I was referring to was post-surgery immediately, gut microbiome changes. Fasting, gut microbiome changes. If you eat a terrible diet, gut microbiome changes. So the microbiome's changing according to what we're eating. So some people may say, well, when you eat this way, you don't have as much diversity, right? And that may be an issue. But a lot of it could be vitamin, you know, there's studies showing that certain microbiome will make B vitamins or vitamin D and help you in these things, or neurotransmitters even. So I think, I don't think we know the right answer, but I think what we're seeing is once that gut microbiome shifts back, we see the same thing, for instance, on a liquid diet. If we never fix the underlying problem and you're eating 500 calories of processed food, it's gonna be a lot different than if you're eating a ketogenic or a carnivore diet in the long run, because your microbiome is going back to where it was, and that's telling your brain to eat more. And there's studies showing, for instance, it's interesting, a podcast that's coming out on Monday on Low Carb MD, We interviewed a gastroenterologist talking about when they do fecal transplants, and they follow up with the people afterwards. The people who received the transplant, they'll start craving what the donor craved. Like they crave kimchi and sauerkraut instead of donuts now, right? And so it's really interesting how much of an impact. I think it's so much in the infancy that we don't understand enough, but we're seeing that. For instance, there's a law that you can't, if you're obese, you can't donate gut microbiome to help people that have colitis, for instance, because there's athletes who start gaining 80 pounds all of a sudden. It's not like they all of a sudden got lazy and fatigued and started eating terrible. So it's frustrating when you go through something like that. It could be that your brain's just not getting a nutrition that it needs, and it's asking for more food and more food before it shuts off that satiety. But it's all speculation at this point. I don't think we have enough data on that yet.
I see you, sir. I'm heading your way. I like a bald man. I'm not gonna lie. Heading towards the bald man like every day of my life.
Hi, I'm not sure who could best answer this or how much I'll understand the answer. About 8 months ago, my wife introduced me to keto. In the first 3 months, I lost 30 pounds. What I enjoyed more than that was the discomfort I had in some of my joints has gone. Pre-diabetic, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. I want to see a change in those, and so I can get off the meds. So I guess my question is that an automatic? If it is, how long does it take? I was a locomotive engineer for a career, no medical background, so if you could maybe limit your answer to 2 or 3 medical terms, it would be greatly appreciated.
I think your question is, how long does it take to come off the meds? Yeah, it does vary by individuals, but lowering that insulin, so getting a baseline insulin to see where you're at is very helpful, right? And depending on how strict you are, some people we've had them do really well and they're still struggling with high blood pressure, doing well with losing weight and all those things. With the inflammation, it's very interesting. Ben Bickman, my first patient, she was scheduled for a total knee replacement, poorly controlled diabetic, and we got her on a low-carb diet, and everything got better because I couldn't clear her for surgery. Her 3-month sugar average was too high. It was too dangerous. So I said, we're going to have to wait. So 6 weeks later, she dropped her A1C somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 points. Like incredible, like just changing her lifestyle. But I said, I'll clear you for surgery. And then she said, well, my knee doesn't hurt anymore, right? Because we're seeing this with the inflammation. And so over time, as we decrease that inflammation, decrease the insulin, increase activity level, hopefully we just slowly watch that and we'll start tapering medicines down slowly. But there's not a magic formula that 3 weeks in you're going to come off all your meds, basically.
I have to laugh. I'm married to an engineer, so as soon as you said I'm an engineer, I understand. I think this is a term, bioindividuality rules, like Brian said. I think a lot of it depends, like you may need some more blood work to kind of get a sense for how whether you're insulin sensitive or a little insulin resistant, that can help mitigate. I've seen people that within 6 weeks, they're on lower doses of blood pressure medicines, diabetes medications, etc. And then I have other people that it's taken months and months, and a lot of it is reflective of what else is going on, like what's your stress level like, what's your sleep like, what nutritional choices are you making, are the little bit of dietary indiscretions that are impacting your results. I mean, that can all play a role for sure.
And I'd like to say, too, that with no medical terms whatsoever involved, that in my clients I see such a wide range, but one of the things I think is really pivotal is how important it is to realize that keto improves so many things, low carb, and one of the things it does is it can clear away the things that can be improved, that are being caused by your diet. But there are some medical things that aren't diet related, and so it sets this foundation because there's so much noise, right? I've got 20 things wrong with me and I'm on 20 different medications, if I can get rid of 10 of them, we can actually attack that with my doctor in a way that's effective now, because I figured out that my blood pressure actually is related to some other condition, and I thought it was going to be the weight loss, but now we can actually see what it's related to, right? So it's really a process, and for some people it's fast, and I just want to encourage you that for a lot of my clients it's slow, and that's not how we wish it sometimes, but constant incremental improvements are lifestyle based, but also it's the same thing in our health. It's just, it takes its time.
Sir, you had a question?
So I do more public policy research, and of course the obvious question is, why doesn't this spread more quickly? Because it saves so much money in addition to suffering. And so there's a big move of the healthcare, the health sharing accounts that they defined under Obamacare as not being insurance. So I had Liberty Health Shares for a number of years. There's many others that are sort of linked to a religion, but they're not tied to the medical establishment. You'd think they would be promoting ways to lose weight and improve chronic conditions, because they're directly sharing those fees from, they're not in the medical establishment. And I wonder if you had any data on that, or even companies that are self-providing their own medical insurance being interested in this.
So I will say there at a conference a few years ago, I think it was Low Carb Denver, I think he was from Deutsche Bank. I'm trying to remember, but they are life insurance people. And is that who it was? Swiss Re, there we go. All right, well, I will find it this weekend and I will let you know. But if Swiss Re was doing a study, and so there is some investigation. It's not from the health insurers, though. It seems like it might be the life insurers that are more interested.
Yeah, it's complicated. And being one that was in the system for 18 years and leaving, there's a vested interest. The problem is the insurance companies, say Blue Cross is for an example, they get paid more by the government the sicker the patient gets. Because their reasoning is the sicker the patient is, the more time it's going to take. And my argument was, the more time I spend with my patient, the less sick they get, right? But there's not that upfront investment, because they're thinking, look, we're going to invest all this time and money up front, and then they're going to change insurance anyways at some point, and we're never going to see the benefit. That's the thinking. So you're right. It's these smaller groups like CHM, Christian Healthcare Ministries. They're going to have a vested interest in taking people off meds, preventing the complications, because that's where the money goes. Problem is, there's more money coming in, the more complications in the standard insurance model, and that's something we have to address for sure before we can really make some headway into this.
I think we have time for one more question, and I saw your hand up on the last one.
So I've worked nights 30 years. I've been trying to do the intermittent fasting, and I was just wondering, does that interfere like with the circadian rhythm and all of that? Night shift, yes. Night shift nurse.
I hear that part, and I was like, oh gosh, like my eyes are not working and my ears are falling apart. It's interesting. I actually wrote an article for, I think it was a nursing journal like 2 or 3 years ago, talking about this. And so, when you really like dig, and I'm knee deep in the circadian biology research, we know that individuals that are doing shift work like long term, there's a lot of health implications. And so obviously, you can, if you want to fast, you can absolutely do it. In fact, I had a NICU doctor who's in Atlanta who was convinced he could not do it because he worked nights. And I have him fasting, just with gentle cues over Twitter. And so I think it's certainly viable. It's like, but also it's the understanding of the challenges of, maybe starting with the days that you're not working shift work and becoming successful, and then, extending your fast. Maybe you're eating your dinner at 5 o'clock at night and going in at 7 o'clock at night for your shift. And then, kind of going that direction. I'm not sure if you have more you want to.
I would just say the same. I think when we look at the data, you look at police officers, firemen, they're under stress. Night nurses, shift work, changing from day to night, suicide rates, all these things go up. And, even police officers, I think the average longevity after retirement is 5 years before you die, right? So you don't get to enjoy your retirement plans. So I think that there's a lot to that, and we know the night shifts nurses are generally heavier than the day shift, right? Because you're trying to stay awake, so you're eating to stay awake, and you're stressed, and it's that perfect combination. When I was in residency, I told my wife, I said, I know they're going to come up with data that shows if you're stressed and sleep deprived, you're going to be starving the next day, and we have tons of data on that now. So it's hard when you're changing shifts back and forth. I think is more difficult, but it's hard because the circadian rhythms are so important. Yeah.
Can I just fit in one more thing, because it's kind of funny since we talked about intermittent fasting a lot. 2 years ago, I did an eating window experiment. You can actually look it up. where I had my baseline diet, which is the same thing I have with every one of my experiments. It's 5 hours apart. It's like 9, 2, and 7, I think, is my baseline diet. And I did that for 5 days. And then I started an eating window where I would compress all 3 of those meals, same exact calories, everything. And I figured to make it easier so that I would have the same fasting window, I just compressed them up to the evening. So I think I started at 3 and went to 7, and it was a complete disaster. It was terrible. My sleeping was horrible. I also just found myself getting hot in the evening. I couldn't, not only could I not sleep well, but I woke up in a fog, etc. I realized I needed to change the experiment immediately and moved it to closer to the around noon. It actually ended up being about 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and it was, excuse the pun, night and day. Entirely different experiment. And for the first time, I actually felt like intermittent fasting was possible because I never feel like I can fast. I feel like I want to snack more than most people would talk about it. But once I compressed the amount of calories that I would be normally eating in a day inside of that 4.5-hour window, it suddenly became possible. And that also ended up influencing more than ever before I really have a drive now that whatever I'm doing fasting-wise, whether I'm doing intermittent fasting, because I generally am not, I will at least have a hard rule that I'm not going to eat within 3 to 4 hours from when I go to sleep. If I can just hold to that one rule, then I can forget a lot of the other things, and it does help a lot. Don't always hold to it, but I try, and that experiment made a big difference for me.
That's incredible. I would say the other piece is I have a lot of advanced practice nurses who were patients of mine, and many of them, once they were in perimenopause and menopause, could not tolerate the night shift going back and forth. It was just, I put CGMs on all of them, and they just started to monitor. They were like, holy cow, I had no idea the blood sugar dysregulation that I'm experiencing with the amount of stress and the lack of sleep and the changes in hormones. So, I always say knowledge is power, and kind of like lean into that and find what works best for you.